Hello and welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, the Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 Hooper and current teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids.
And I'm Omari Sankofa II, Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And of course, we're always blessed to be joined by our producer, Wes Davenport. And if you're not listening to Wes and Blake Silverman over on the Pin Down on the Detroit Bad Boys YouTube channel, and you should be, and another podcast you should be listening to, if you're not, I'm sure you are, is the Locked On Pistons podcast, where Khahil holds it down every single day, guys. Like every single day, Khoo is holding it down with Detroit Pistons content. Khoo, what is going on, my guy?
I'm doing good, man. I appreciate you guys having me on. It is pretty early, but you know I'm up and early. I'm ready to talk some Pistons.
That's good. It's good being up early, but it's good when you hear it in your voice, especially because it adds more authenticity to the pod. When you hear like that early morning crack in your voice, it's like, yeah, these guys are up.
The grind is real.
Mode. The grind is real. They got Pistons on the brain at 7 a.m. This is our source for news right here.
Yeah, so we get our first greetings from Poland. I don't think we've had Poland yet, Omari. Do we need to find out what time it is over there? I know this is always
we do need to find out what time it is in Poland, actually. I was going to ask.
Question from us. I think it is different. The time is different in Poland than Brazil, in terms of if I have a bearings correct on where Poland is at in the world. We're going to talk Pistons today, guys. We're going to talk about the overall team, what we've seen through 4 preseason games, and I'll get the caveat over at the top. It is preseason. We all know it's preseason. Khoo knows it's preseason. They say it's 1:30 in Poland right now. What's up, Tweet House morning? Yeah, great to start our morning off with Pistons. So Khoo knows it's preseason. Omari knows it's preseason. So we don't have to just say it over and over and over again, guys. But quickly, before that, Khoo, I have a very important question for you. How many tabs do you have open right now on your computer and or your iPhone? And Omari, I'm going to ask you this as well.
All right, so on my phone, I got 123 tabs open.
Oh, no.
Actually, I lied. On my phone, I have 158 tabs open.
Oh, cool.
But on my computer, it's funny you asked that because literally right before we started recording, I was going through and like getting rid of some because it was getting on my nerves. I had like 11 open. So
okay, 11's not crazy. I have 4 or 5 open right now, but they're almost all for the pod. You know, like I have preseason stats, I have last season stats, Twitter, all of that. So, man, that's a lot on the iPhone, though. Omari, what are your numbers? iPhone and MacBook or
yeah,
computer?
I have 12 up on my MacBook, and I don't have my phone on me. I was just looking for my phone, and I'm not sure where I put it, but I know I have like over 100. I've usually hovered between like 90 and like 110 on my phone before like my brain goes, we should probably not have more than like 110 tabs open. So let's close a few. But that's where I'm at right now, though. I don't like having a bunch of tabs up on my laptop because I can't find things. So yeah, I try to keep it below 15 if I can.
So Wes says 3 on the computer, 5 that he keeps on his phone. Tweet House says, how do you guys deal with all the tabs, Bryce? I know as a person in education, you see some egregious tab violations. So this is where this question comes from. I literally have a teacher in my hallway. If she asks for help, I refuse it. I say, no, I am not helping you with those 40 tabs open on your MacBook. I can't look at it. And then the other day, one of my favorite students, they had them get their phones. They're not allowed their phones in class, but I think one of the teachers was using it for, class purposes. She had 500 tabs open on her phone, and that's the max. We found out that once you hit 500, the iPhone, Safari, whatever, makes you close one out to open another one. But apparently she had left open every tab she had ever opened in the history of her phone. So had to get that one out of the way.
Your phone should like protest when that happens. Like 500 tabs. Like
it did. Apparently it does. It says no more. That's all I can hold.
Yeah, it makes me uncomfortable. That's like way too many tabs. Nobody needs that much information. We're already like overloaded with information. If it takes me 10 minutes to scroll through the tabs on my phone, like that's like you're doing way too much. Like that's too much.
Yeah, I mean, Omari, you saw how many pictures I keep in my photo library at dinner a couple of years ago in Denver. So
that's the real egregious one. I have like 6,000, 7,000 photos on my phone.
Yeah, I definitely have thousands of photos on my phone.
Are they
having an entire family with like 3 photos total is like some 1950 stuff. Like that's like how they used to carry like photos in their wallet back in the day.
Who are yours in albums, or is it literally just 6,000 photos in the?
I mean, there's some in albums, but most of them are just recent and like the recent album.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I have 3, and funny enough, 2 of them have to do with this pod. There's the logo, Pistons Pulse logo. There's one from me and Omari when we did the photo shoot, and I use those to like tweet stuff out. And then one of my kids, and that's legit all I have. I have 3 photos in there. So Randy
What
gets
about
really
your wife?
No, I don't have one. Like, she is the screensaver or whatever on my
Okay.
phone, but I didn't keep the picture. Like, I just put it as the whatever and then got rid of the picture. So she gets real mad when I have to ask for pictures of our family when people ask. So yeah. Matthew says, "Morning guys, love this early AM thing, by the way." Yeah, I'm glad. I think some of our listeners do. It's definitely not easy on us all the time, but let's get into it. Cool. We talked about we don't want to go individual players just yet. So here's what I want to start off with. What are your vibes? 4 preseason games. We've seen ups, downs, wins, losses. I think we've seen every end of the spectrum so far. What are your vibes around the team right now?
I think vibes are a lot better than last year at this around this time. And real quickly, I know it looks like my camera's glitching a little bit, but I think my audio is fine. So just let me know.
Yeah. No, your audio's good. The camera glitches every once in a while, but your audio's good, man.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I think the vibes are really good. I don't want, like you said, don't want to get into specifics real quick just yet. But yeah, I think everyone seems like they're happy, like they want to be out there. I think the main difference between this point of last year and now is the veterans. The veterans seem a lot more engaged, and it seems like the young players are more welcoming and more. Not that they weren't welcoming of vets last year. It just seems like they're more, attached or like have a better relationship with the vets this year. And they said it so at the media day. They've shown some nice things. There's been some good and some bad. But I think overall there's been some really good signs during preseason. But yeah, I think vibes are pretty high right now for the team.
Omari, where are you at? Like, after our last recording, we had seen 1 preseason game and it looked really good, right? Now we got 3 more. Again, 2 of those were losses where things didn't look quite as smooth. The one sandwich in between was a little bit better. Where are vibes for you just in terms of where this team is at and kind of how things are looking on the court?
Yeah, I mean, I think vibes have been fine. Like kind of like with Kutas join after last season. Like, I think it would have to be a really, really bad preseason for the vibes to be comparable or worse than they were, in the back half of last season once things were already pretty much done. But, I think you're seeing a lot of energy in this new offensive scheme. I know we'll get into all of that, but, JB coming in with more energy and, the vets have all gotten pretty strong reviews. You have Tobias, obviously was coming back to Detroit sort of specifically with that role in mind to be that leader and to sort of coach these young guys up. So definitely a different energy. And I think you're like untethered from like everything that's been built up to this point in the sense, right? Like, where last season it's like, okay, this is year 4, like we all have to, or this is year 3 or whatever year it was, we have to like show improvement. Now you have a new group in and it's like, all right, let's just wait and see what happens. So I think there's some freedom that comes with that too, where there's not that there's a mandate last season, but that there's no pressure to really show that you've gotten much better, right? Like, you have to improve, but they're not saying we got to come out and make the playoffs or whatnot. And I think that loose energy is being reflected so far.
So Amari brought up the offense. I know after the first game, we kind of joked that we finally saw the 0.5 offense for the first time when we were looking for it all last season. It seemed like there was some good flow. I don't know that that's continued as much as the very first preseason game. I think we've seen it stall out at times. Obviously, last night they didn't score the ball real well, but we'll go through some of the shooting percentages. Like, honestly, right now, they're just not making threes. The guys they brought in to make threes just haven't. And hopefully that's not the case, right? If they don't, then this team's in trouble. What have been your thoughts on the offense, just the flow, how they're using guys, and just how it looks, kind of big picture, not individually how guys are playing?
I think there's an interesting development I want to watch for offensively when the season starts. I have some questions on whether certain parts of the offense is sustainable or if certain parts of the offense is going to continue once games actually start to matter. I think they're, like you mentioned, the ball's been moving a little bit more. They've been playing a lot faster this preseason than they did last year. But like I said, once we get further into it, there are some things about the offense that I know fans are super excited. I'm not trying to make them not excited, but there's certain parts of the offense that I just question whether they're going to continue to go that type of way when the real games start happening.
So Omari, again, like we saw one game, the flow was really good. Since then, I do think it's bogged down to just a little bit. But if you just look at 3-point percentages, Fontecchio's at 27, Tobias is at 29, Tim Hardaway Jr. is at 6, and Malik Beasley is at 27. So we really haven't even seen the vets shoot it that well yet. But in some ways, I still feel like the flow is better. We've seen some different actions. We got 3 more games since the last time we recorded. Where are you at with just the way the offense looks, the actions, and how people are being used?
Overall, I think it's looked pretty good. You're seeing a lot of just off-ball movement that you didn't see last season. And I know you mentioned this on the pod a week or two ago, but you talk about the 0.5 offense. And for the most part, it seems like they've been sticking into more of a 0.5 concept this season than they were last year. You still have plays where, Cade has to create something with 6 seconds left, which is always going to happen. But overall, it just seems like there's a lot of intention in the way that players are moving, and there's an understanding of what players can and can't do as well. Like I know we'll talk about Jaden Ivy, but so far, I think it's been a unique mix of him, playing off of Cade and him coming off of pin downs and cutting and attacking in transition and not having to really take more than 2 or 3 dribbles with the ball whenever he has the ball. And, we saw him more in like that lead action last night. And, I think you wonder, does this offense eventually, will it need another ball handler just to kind of keep things moving? But, but we're not there yet. And I think overall you're seeing players buy into the scheme and try to prove that, this concept of everybody can, create for others can actually work.
Cool. So one thing I thought coming in, I did think the offense would be better, right? Just because of the floor spacing. Like you had real guys with at least gravity. Like if nothing else, Tim Hardaway Jr. has gravity. Malik Beasley has real gravity. Even if there are some flaws, Tobias has gravity. I didn't think we were going to see a whole lot of improvement on the defensive end. Like that's not where I was expecting much of a jump. But I feel like we've at least seen these guys be more organized, better with rotations. I said on Game Theory last night, I think I've seen more weak side X out rotations in the first 4 preseason games than maybe we've seen in the last 4 years. I realize that's hyperbole, but for real, I think they're kind of locked in. Do you have any kind of surprises on the defensive end, positive or negative? Maybe you're seeing it differently.
No, I completely agree with you. Defensively, I think it really boils down to the veterans being more locked in. The veterans that they have are making more attempts at playing defense. Like, I understand that, like, I don't want to keep, like, throwing shots at last year's veterans, but, like, Bojan didn't try defensively. Burks didn't try defensively. This past preseason game, you mentioned it, they're making all kinds of X-out closeouts. I mean, I've seen Tobias tag down the roller aggressively like 4 or 5 times per game. I've seen him get a steal or at least a steal or 2 each game from him tagging down, intercepting a pass, and leading a fast break. I've seen him make it, like you mentioned, a rotation on the weak side. I've seen Cade make some really nice rotations as well on the weak side, rotating down and tagging down the roller. And even guys like Jaden Ivy and Jaylen Duran, who we had questions about defensively. I've seen Jaylen Duran. I think there's questions about him defensively still in like specific areas, but when it comes to simply contesting shots at the rim, I think you can clearly see that he's trying to contest shots at the rim, whether he actually gets them or not. He's actually attempting. Whereas last year, there's a lot of times when you just kind of watch the guy go by him at the rim. He's attempting to get shots at the rim. And Ivy, I think Ivy is always going to be probably a neutral to negative defender. You just want him to be giving energy, and he's giving a ton of energy on that end of the floor. So I really think it leads from their veterans. Malik Beasley. There was a game like 2 games ago, he had like 5 fouls. Those weren't from offensive charges. Those were from like him getting into KD and like trying to get aggressive on defense. So the fact that they have veterans in preseason trying to play defense really kind of sets the tone where it's like, hey, if this old dude's trying to play defense in preseason, why aren't we? And it's kind of just like, it's infectious.
We'll talk about those guys a little bit more individually, but I agree with that. Tobias had multiple defensive playmaking possessions last night. We're definitely going to talk about JD's defense because yeah, I think there's some real things to talk about there, including some things that are a little bit better. Omari, quickly, what are your thoughts on the defense? Because I want to get Crew's thoughts on the rotation before we move on to talking about individual players. So 3 more game sample. Where are you at with this defense? Is it a little further along than what you thought? Because again, it's exceeded my expectations, but my expectations were low coming into the season.
Yeah, I thought Malik Beasley said something interesting a couple weeks ago after practice, just to kind of go back to the mindset that these veterans have brought. But he said a lot of executing on defense is just wanting to do it. And he's been, pretty upfront. Like, he didn't come into the league as a defensive guy. Like, he came in as a shooter, like that's who he is. But, I think he's played with effort on defense and try to set a certain tone on certain possessions, which again, like I just always go back to him saying a lot of it is just wanting to do it. And you see that players want to do it. They understand that last season we can't do that again. Duran, it's funny, I saw your notes after the game, Bryce, and I'm going through my notes and we both pointed out this exact possession midway through the first where Duran just like had a really good defensive possession. He read the play, like he didn't bite, like he went hands up, didn't jump, didn't get out of position. And it's just stuff like that where you're just seeing small signs of growth and like understanding what you need to do. So there's been a lot of encouraging signs. They still have a ways to go, obviously, but I think just from a want-to standpoint and an understanding what you can't do standpoint, there's definitely been improvement compared to last year.
Will J says, love the show. My 2 favorite podcasts feels like the Avengers. So here's what I need to know. Like, you got to give us the characters. Who's who in
Bryce, so you don't know nothing about Marvel, I thought, right?
Yeah.
So you don't.
I don't. Iron Man, right? Like, can I be Tony
That's
Stark?
one of them.
Tony Stark, because he has a lot of money. I want to be Tony Stark. Iron Man. You guys can fight for everybody else. So, all right, cool. The rotation. I'll give my quick thoughts. I thought Fontecchio was going to start. I don't think he's going to now. I wonder, or maybe it's matchup dependent. I think it looks like maybe Beasley does end up starting there. And I actually think we're going to get the 9-man rotation. I wonder if Ron Holland ends up out of the rotation, and that's where Asar's minutes come when Asar gets back. Whether Asar, I don't think they're going to start Asar when he first comes back, right? Like, he's missed so much time at this point. But that's how I see it. Where are you at with kind of the rotation? You don't even have to say starters, whatever, but just, is this the 9-man group you think we're going to see?
First of all, I just gotta say, calling me Ant-Man is pretty disrespectful. that's pretty damn disrespectful. I'm not gonna lie to you.
Ant-Man was like the star of Infinity War. Like, the reason why
bro.
they saved the day was because of Ant-Man. I gotta give Ant-Man his props.
Here's what's unfair, Coot. Like, you're not that much shorter than Amari, if at all, right? Are you?
I'm 5'9".
What's Amari? 5'10"?
You know what's crazy? I've seen
got, like,
him
an
so many
inch or two
times
on
in
Cool.
person. I can't remember like what he looks like compared to me.
Yeah.
Like, we're
not that far apart in height.
I'm not trying to flex on anybody being 6'6". I'm just saying that, like, it's not like you guys are that's normal male height in the US,
We're
right?
small. We're tiny. We get it, Bryce.
I didn't
we're like
say
little
it.
manlets.
Oh my gosh. Okay, rotation, rotation.
So the rotation I think is really interesting. I don't know if you guys heard the same things throughout the offseason, but I felt pretty strongly based on things I heard that Asar would be starting if he was healthy and he was a full go for training camp. But obviously that's not the case. He's not. We don't know when he'll be cleared. We don't know when he'll be playing. And there's been a lot of I talked with Locked On Cavs host Danny Cunningham about, JB Bickerstaff and his rotations over the last few years. And he spoke about early in the offseason, he said, get ready for a 9-man rotation. You're not going to see him be going 10, 11, 12 deep. It's not how he likes to go. And I think that's something that a lot of us in the Pistons community probably would enjoy. If you looked at how last year was handled, there was times when we saw 12 people played in one quarter. We'll leave it at that. But the rotation, I really enjoy seeing 9 players played in the first half. I really like the fact that he's staggering certain guys. Like you said, we'll get into specifics later, but the way he's staggering players, I really like it, specifically Jaden Ivy. And when Asar comes back, I do think that it'll be Ron Holland losing his minutes and then THJ losing some of his. Do you want me to get into specifics with it? You want me to wait on for that?
No, I just was curious where you thought kind of the rotation was going to be, because I found myself going last night finally like, okay, it seems like JB kind of has what he wants. And then it looks really easy to just say, hey, Ron, your offense kind of isn't there right now. we're going to put Asar into those minutes. And then that's a good point. Like Asar eventually is going to need more minutes than what Ron is getting. So maybe he steals from THJ, or if Beasley's having a off night, or whoever, depending on matchup. So we're kind of in lockstep there with what we think the rotation is going to be, at least in the 9 guys that are in it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I just think that I'm interested to see when Asar is fully healthy and he has fully practices. I think it's going to be tough at a certain point if they're playing really well to like try to put him into the starting lineup. If they're playing well, I think they just keep him off the bench. That's what I'm paying attention to the most. What do they do when Asar comes back? I think everything else, I think he's basically figured that out. JB, that is. I think he's figured out what he wants his rotation to look like.
And for, what it's worth, guys, like that leaves Sasser probably out of the rotation. That leaves Paul Reed out of the rotation. Some guys that are interesting. Doesn't mean they're not going to play, right? Foul trouble, injuries are going to happen. Those guys will eventually get minutes. But I think all of us are in lockstep on the 9 guys that are probably in. We are going to go to a short break. I just want to make it known the average height in the U.S. is 5'9". So I was not making fun of anybody for being 5'9". It's just very normal.
You weren't making fun. You were just very subtly
I was trying to support our guest. No. Listen, I didn't like that we brought Ku on. We woke him up super early in the morning and he got disrespected by someone trying to say he was short. And so I was just trying to be like, well, Amari's the same height. Like, my bad.
And then Amari caught a stray. And then
Amari caught a stray.
You're like, well, Amari's short too.
Okay.
To try to make it better. Bryce is 6'6", so most people are short compared to Bryce. Me and Ku are not short. You put us in the room with 100 average American men, and we're not going to stand out.
All right, my bad. Let's move on.
Okay,
we're going to go to break. When we come back, let's talk individual players. Omari, let's start with Cade Cunningham. We'll get Ku's thoughts on him. We'll get your thoughts on him right after this.
All right, we're back with Cade Cunningham. We're back with segment 2, and we're going to talk about Cade Cunningham. So we are back with Cade Cunningham. Anyway, I thought, Cade came out in the season a little bit slow, which, I mean, it's preseason, so no big deal, right? But last 2 games, he's looked a little bit closer to, what we saw for the majority of last season. Cool, we can start with you and then to Bryce, but just overall, you're looking at main Cade Cunningham impressions through 4 games. What stood out so far?
Yeah, I wasn't really concerned with his overall. What I was looking for with Cade wasn't really his stats for him to go out and like score 20 plus a game. Like, I know that wasn't his goal entering in preseason. I spoke about this on the podcast like a week and a half ago. Different players, I'm sure you know this, Bryce. I'm sure you know this, Omari. Different players attack preseason in different ways with different goals. Yep. Especially veterans. Veterans may look at it to address, I just want to get back in shape. Some veterans may not even play at all. Like some guys use it to work on weaknesses. Like, people use it for different reasons. And I know Cade's main goal throughout preseason has been just be fully healthy and to be in game shape when the season starts off, so he doesn't have one of those slow starts that he's had over the last few years. They've heard it. Cade's heard it. He knows that he started off slow the last few years, and that's something that he's really, that's one of the main goals of getting into regular season, just be in tip-top shape to where we don't have to wait 10 games for Cade to hit his stride. That's the main goal for him so far through preseason. So I wasn't really concerned after the first game or 2. I also said on the podcast, the only thing I really wanted to see from Cade, I think we've seen one part a lot, the other part not as much, which I'm kind of disappointed about. I wanted to see him. He spoke a lot this offseason. I talked with his trainer, Ashton, a lot this offseason. They worked a lot on dribble pull-up shooting from 3 and his floaters. And I think his floaters, you've seen him really rep out during preseason.
Yes.
And it looks really good. It looks really good and can really make him – I think he was already somewhat of a 3-level scorer with his mid-range shooting, but it just adds a different level of the area on the floor he can be he can cause damage from. So I'm really happy to see him rep out his floater a lot as well. I think the main part of what the floater is going to bring him, and I asked him this at Media Day, and he kind of said the same, is that it takes some of those attempts at the rim that were just like bad attempts and converts them into easier looks. And just doing that will make his finishing numbers better. Just removing the tough attempts will raise the efficiency at the rim. His dribble pull-up threes, we haven't seen it as much. And I'm kind of disappointed in that. I think in the 3rd game, we saw him do it a little bit more. But this past game, I think he took 1 3. I think it was like a catch and shoot 3.
I think it was 1.
Yeah. And so that's an area of his game that I know they worked on a lot and he wants to bring to the game this year. I'm really disappointed that we didn't see it as much during the preseason. I wanted to see him get like 3, 4, 5 attempts up. Just anytime a guy goes under the screen, if they're playing off him step back, I know he's been working on the step back three. So I like the floaters. I like that part of his game added. Everything else, just get to regular season healthy, and I'm cool.
Yeah, like that's one thing that I'm really interested to see with him is the 3-point shooting. I think that was one of my biggest notes I put in this last game was, he's really got it going from 2, right? But, just talking numbers, guys, and I know, again, the caveat, he's 50% from the field right now. So, all of this talk around Cade of efficiency and finishing and all of that, 50%, I do think the floater, like I think, we say 3-level scoring, but it's really 4 levels. You have the 3-point line, you have a mid-range pull up, then you kind of have that in-between game where we're talking about with the floater, and then you have at the rim. And for some guys, there's a 5th level from like the really deep threes. You know what he's average assist-wise? 10.3 assists per 36. Last year during the season, he averaged 8.1. So I think his playmaking has been really effective as well. So he's scoring the basketball efficiently, even if the 3-point shot hasn't gone down. He's rebounding the ball better. His assists are up. And we mentioned it earlier. I think this is the best he's played defense since we've seen him. Like, I think he is locked in. He's made more rotations, all of those things. So I assume the 3-point shot is there. But I'm with you, Khahil. Like, that's the one thing. There's a couple times like, nah, Cade, just take that. Just take that. Like, that's yours. Maybe he's just trying to get other guys involved, right? Like, lots of times those are going to come off ball screens, Khahil. Maybe it's like, you know what? I could shoot this, but it's preseason. Let me get J.I. a look or Beasley a look or something like that.
And that's one thing about Cade is
No, go ahead.
Yeah, but I was going to say one thing about Cade too is that he's not necessarily a guy that's going to like chuck threes, right? If it's not there. Like I remember even during his hot streak, like toward the end of November going into 2024 last season, he was shooting like above 50% from the floor, but he wasn't knocking down or taking a lot of threes. So, like that's just one thing I think we've seen with Cade just through the first, 4 years of his career is that he's not necessarily going to be a 3-point chucker, but at the same time, you want to see him take that shot, right? You want to see him take more. And, I know we'll talk about it, but I wonder how much of that is just him probably needing, a playmaker next to him to get him some of those open looks because he's not a guy that's going to necessarily take a lot of step back threes or try to create a bunch of threes if they're not there for him.
Go ahead, Khahil. What did you have on that?
Yeah, I thought there's 2 things I wanted to add real quick. When we get to the overall offense of the team, what you brought up, Bryce, is something that was what I was kind of referencing earlier. So I just wanted to, let everybody know that's something that I wanted to hit on a little later. As far as his pull-up 3-point shooting, I think he's going to have off-ball. He's going to have catch-and-shoot threes created for him this year. I'm not too concerned about that. I think he is aware. I think his team's aware. I think they were aware all offseason that pull-up 3-point shooting he needs for his gravity. Yeah. He needs to have that in his game, and it's something he had in college. It's something that he did a lot in college, and he kind of after November this past year did a little bit more of it. He was a lot more efficient in that regard. Didn't take a lot of attempts, but it was more efficient in that regard. There was a few times in the first and second game you saw him taking the dribble pull-up threes, and then this third and fourth game he kind of went away from it as much, even though guys were still going underneath the screen and kind of playing off of him. I think that's just a part of his game. He has to rep out and he has to bring to the floor, or it's going to make it harder for him to be consistently efficient every single night. And if he does bring that part to his game, it will really make him like that next level basketball player that I think he can be.
Well, we've seen the playmaking, we've seen the floater, we've seen the mid-post isolation stuff now, we've seen the defense, we've seen him create. If you force guys to go over the top of every ball screen because he's going to knock it down if you go under, how are you going to stop him? Like, then he can get to whatever spot he wants and get to whatever shot he wants. And so I think that's why it's exciting. And I do love seeing him go to that mid-post isolation. It's something I thought he had in his game in college, and I'm glad that we're seeing it come out 2, 3, 4 times a game, even just in the preseason. Let's move on. We could do a whole segment on Cade, but there are other guys I want to talk about as well. Let's go Jaylen Duran first, so that way we just don't stay in the backcourt. We talked a little bit about his defense. Again, I don't think stats are something we should really love about 4 preseason games. I do think this is interesting, guys. Coup first. Jaylen Duran per 36 in the preseason, 3 stocks per game, 1.3 steals, 1.7 blocks. That may not be like overwhelming, like, oh my gosh, but last year during the regular season, it was 1.7. I think Jaylen Duran being a defensive playmaker is something a lot of us have wanted to see. Wes has thrown the numbers out a lot in terms of how little he has done in his career. I think we've seen it. I think it's shown up on the court as well. Some of his blocks, steals, deflections. What have you thought about his defense kind of overall? And then you can dive into some of the details also.
I think just what you want from him on defense is just simply to be more locked in and to simply just care more. He spoke about it at the media day that, someone, I forget who it was that asked him, someone asked him about the defensive side of the floor. And he said, it was a real short answer. He's like, I just need to be more locked in. And I think that goes a long way, simply just trying and just caring on that end. I think last season he just stopped caring at a certain point or stopped, showing as much effort on that end. And he's never, I don't feel like through his first 2 years really showcased I don't think anyone really thought he was going to be like this dominant defender through 2 years. But just simply caring and having like a sense of a level of effort on that end goes a long way. And I think through these 4 preseason games, I'm still interested to see whether they have him at the level. Do you have him in drop? How are you going to use him in pick and roll coverage? I still think he's shown some weaknesses in that regard. But the main area that everyone's really wanted to see from him for the last, for all season, everyone's talked about was just him protecting the rim. And he's had numerous possessions where he's went after shots, that he's blocked some shots. Like you mentioned earlier, there was a possession yesterday in this game, in their preseason game, where he just went straight up on somebody. I forget who it was. It was a drive, went straight up and forced a really tough miss. So not only just that, there was another play yesterday as well, where he rotated and sent a shot out of bounds or to the right corner. I don't know if it went all the way out of bounds, but went all the way to that right corner, I believe it was. So you've seen more attention and more effort at just protecting the rim. And that in and of itself is a good improvement to simply have. You'd like to see him improve in some other regards, like you mentioned, the details and his pick and roll coverage. I think there's a few times he's let the guy get behind him in pick and roll coverage. There's a few times they've let the bounce pass get through for a bucket. I think he's still learning like the angles of where he wants to be and the depth of his drop, where he wants to be in those regards. But like I said, just simply attempting to block shots at the rim is a big deal, because last year, I think you guys know, he didn't even try a lot of the time to even like attempt to block shots. So I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, as Wes says, nice seeing a few highlights where he rotates from the opposite block with active hands. He had one where I think he gave up a drive or something, but kept playing and then ended up getting the block. Just multiple efforts in those situations. His hand activity and ball screen. I think he's going to look a lot better in drop than at the level. We saw him playing at the level against the Bucks, and even Dame was able to go around him. And listen, I love Dame, but he's not exactly the most explosive guard that Duran's going to have to play against on the perimeter. Omari, you mentioned some plays that you highlighted or wrote down from last night, from the last couple of games. What have you thought so far with Duran's defense, where it looks like we've seen little baby steps, maybe a little bit more activity, but overall, kind of where do you see him kind of anchoring this Pistons defense right now?
Yeah, certainly more awareness of just what he needs to do as a rim protector. I actually asked him after practice last week what the coaching staff has communicated to him as far as specifically what they want to see from him defensively. And, he said straight up, like, just to be that rim protector, just to be that deterrent at the rim. And I thought he had that pretty much from the start last night. I think it was D'Anthony Melton who had a floater attempt a couple minutes in, and he rotated really quickly, got up, rejected it. I mentioned the defensive stand he had on Trace Jackson Davis later on that same quarter, where somebody gets beat by a defender. It
was a ball screen action, Omari. So someone like J.I., I think, got hung up on the ball screen, so Duran had to help, but then he was able to recover and
he comes up, helps, comes back, maintains his position, doesn't bite, doesn't jump, doesn't foul, which I think we saw a lot last season of him getting out of position and then realizing, I got to get back. And at that point, the defenders anticipating it, right? Not that he struggled with foul trouble too much, but again, like, he's year 3. He's a guy who's still young. He's about to turn 21, still the youngest on this team. But you're seeing those baby steps of him just having that general awareness of what the offense is trying to accomplish when he's on the floor and what he needs to do to counter that. And a lot of it really is just positioning. I thought he had some athletic blocks last night, but it's not even about that all the time. It's just keeping your feet planted, not getting caught out of position, not giving up an easy bucket, just discipline. And I would say through 4 games, I think we've seen a little bit of a more disciplined approach from him.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say is I think in ball screens, he still gets his hips turned. So he gave up a couple lobs to Trace Jackson Davis last night because he completely opens his hips to the ball handler. And then that makes it hard to recover to the roll man. So, last thoughts on Jaylen Duran, and then take us into Jaden Ivy. So, if you have anything else on JD, and then we'll rotate into Jaden Ivy here before we go to break.
So JD, I just thought, like you said, like we've mentioned, the rim protection has been more active. That's really all you wanted to see. I don't think you've seen as much like half court usage as like they maybe were teasing in the offseason and at the media day. We haven't seen it as much. But I assume you'll probably see more of it as the season goes on, especially.
Do you like that, Koo? Are you interested in that?
I mean, I'm interested, and I also understand why maybe you haven't seen it as much because, I mean, Omari mentioned it earlier. I think Omari mentioned it earlier, or he tweeted it. Either way, the playmaking with Cade off the floor is where I'm really interested to see how they're going to, handle that. And I think Duran has to be one of those guys that takes up some of that usage because of his ability to run at the DHO, at the high post, and utilizes playmaking. However, I think like in the first game, he had a few attempts off the dribble that were just like, okay, let's relax a little bit. Let's fall back a little bit. So I understand there's a balancing act you gotta have between, you want to utilize his passing, but you also don't want to end up in like pull up middies that from Jaylen Duran. You don't want to end up in like some, bad offense. So it's a balancing act. I just thought that we'd see maybe a little bit more of it during preseason based on how they hyped it up, like at media day and during practices and stuff. But I think overall you feel pretty happy with what you've seen from Duran. It can get better, but I think overall you probably feel happy with what you've seen.
All right, let's rotate. Wes gives me some love for my rotate comment here that I can't take credit for as an accident. I just couldn't find the right word. Jaden Ivy, who probably been the guy that has looked the best through preseason. I mean, again, the caveat of we're talking about the 4-game sample of what we have right now. I do want to make mention of, and I assume you were going to go here, Q. Right now, Jaden Ivy shooting 61% from the field and 53% from 3. Probably not sustainable, but it is good to see him make shots. So where are you at with Jaden Ivy, specifically on the offensive end? I think you touched on the defense, Koo, in terms of he's going to bring energy. I think he's learned the multiple effort things and how he can make up for some of that with his athleticism. I think we're all in agreement. He probably caps at neutral, maybe below that if it really gets there. But I'm kind of interested for your thoughts on the offensive end.
I got a question real quick for you.
Okay.
Do you want me to get into like the overall team offense, or you want to get into that later?
No, because I assume this is where you were going to go. So like we can get into, because honestly, we still got to get to some of the other individual players. So give us your thoughts. We'll probably go to break and we'll end up on JI for 5 or 10 minutes here. So you can throw it all out now. We're not saving anything.
Okay. So Jaden Ivy's played really well. I think he's clearly been the most, the player that people are going to be the most happy about from preseason. I think he's been playing extremely well for the Pistons in preseason. He's showing all the things you really wanted to see from him offensively. Real quickly, just to go to what I was mentioning about the offense, what I was really interested to see play out during the regular season, it has to do with Jaden Ivy.
Yeah.
They're playing a lot faster with Cade on the floor, and they're kind of, moving the ball a little bit more. I'm interested to see, you mentioned it earlier, Bryce, there's been some shots Cade's had, and maybe if you go back to last year and you watch Cade play, that maybe he attacks a certain different way in the half court, or he maybe takes this shot, or he pushes this tempo, or whatever. He plays at his own space or pace. It feels like during preseason, he's made a concerted effort to try to get everyone else involved, let everyone else get into a groove heading into the regular season, let guys feel good about themselves heading into the regular season. I know a lot of people are really happy about how fast the Pistons seem to be playing. I just question whether that actually will fall back a little bit once the games actually start. I feel like, I may be wrong, but I feel like once the games actually start to matter, Cade will naturally start to take the ball a little bit more and naturally will start to, guys like Cade are natural ball stoppers. Like your best players are natural ball stoppers. Like
Sure.
they're going to have the ball in their hands. They're going to go create. I think you'll see that a little bit more, at least my opinion, once the games start to matter. I don't think Cade is going to just be like kind of floating at times in the regular season. But, I mean, we'll see. But going back to Ivy, I think that right there has really helped during preseason. They've kind of given him complete freedom to do what he wants to do. He's, like you mentioned, he's shooting the ball at like a completely insane rate. That's not going to sustain, but even if it drops from 51 to 38, like that's a big time improvement. One of the things I've really liked seeing from him shooting wise is not the dribble pull-ups, it's not the step back threes. It's how well he's shooting from the corners.
Yes.
If he's able to shoot that well from the corners, that really is a game changer for their half court offense. And I know one of the quick responses will be, well, why do you want to play him in the corner? He's had multiple 3-point attempts from the corners, and no one thinks that he's been planted in the corner. That just happens throughout an offense. A guy drives baseline, you rotate down to the corner like that. That's
everybody takes their time in the corner. Like everybody has to get there eventually and play that role.
Right, exactly. So I've really liked that aspect of his game. It looks like he's shooting really well from the corners. His jump shot looks a lot more fluid and compact, and it doesn't look like he's kind of moving all over the place with his lower body. I think that has a lot to do with Fred Vinson. And then just overall finishing wise, he's finishing the ball really well in the half court as well. I don't really care so much for like the flashy plays. I care more for like the small details of what he's doing. And the corner threes has been really impressive. How compact his jump shot looks to where, there's times where I used to make the joke. It looked like he was almost parallel with the floor when he would take pull-up shots. That's not the case at all anymore. He's almost jumping and landing in the exact same spot, which is really good to see. And then the other area that I've been really impressed with him by, he's attacking the gaps of the defense really well off ball. Not with the ball in his hands. He's cutting down. He's making slot cuts timely.
Yeah.
He's jumping into areas where Cade will drive baseline or a guy will drive down the wing, and all of a sudden Ivy's at the high post area or Ivy's kind of in the the defense helps, and all of a sudden Ivy rotates to the top of the key where a gap is open at. Like he's finding gaps within the defense off ball wise to really make them pay over and over and over again. And then when they stagger him and Cade, and they got Ivy out there on the floor, I broke down one of these plays on my personal YouTube that I'm doing some film breakdown on now. The spacing, you mentioned it earlier, Bryce. There is a play that Ivy had with his own lineup, Stu at the 5, and you have THJ, Tobias, and another shooter, I think it was Malik Beasley. And you got guys corner, wing, and Ivy just has the full court to do whatever he wants, get to the paint, pull-up shot. He ended up with a pull-up shot, but just having those spacing principles for Ivy and even Cade, but especially for Ivy, I think really makes the offense easier for him. And I think he's taking advantage of, every rep that he's had. I think he's one of the players that definitely is attacking preseason with the idea of every single rep I get out here, I'm going to treat like it's the playoffs, and I'm going to get the most out of every single rep possible. And I think he's played really well.
Yeah, no, that's, Omari and I talked a lot about the spacing for Cade, and we finally had, a viewer, a listener, bring it up to us like, hey, what about the spacing for Ivy and how much it helps him? And it's like, yeah, like good luck stopping that guy with the way he gets downhill. I had it as my first Ivy note last night, 3-point make, 850 in the first quarter. Cade ran a ball screen with Duran. Ivy's in the backside corner. Cade whips it to him. He knocks it down. He makes those, he cuts. And then real quick here before we go to break, guys, Jaden Ivy, second on the team in offensive rebounding right now. Like he is, it's something he's figured out. And with his athleticism, it's something he can do really well. So before we go to break, thank you everybody that's tuned in live. Hit the like button, the subscribe button, all of that. Continue to help us grow. I know the algorithms, whatever stuff, the more likes, the more subscribes, ratings, reviews, all of that. When we come back from this break, Omari, I want you to give your thoughts on Jaden Ivy, and then Ku, start thinking of what players you want to talk to. I'm going to give you the reins of, you want to talk about Beef Stew, you want to talk about Holland, you want to talk about Tech, whatever. We'll go through the 2 or 3 players we can get to. I'll let you do that. But Omari, your thoughts on Jaden Ivy right after this.
All right, we're back with segment 3, and I'm going to talk about J.I. real quick before we move on and try to squeeze a few more players in over the last 15 minutes. But I touched on it earlier, but I think the offense has done a really good job of, just tapping into what we know Ivy can do at a really high level. And with that, I think with Ivy also understanding what he can do at a high level, it's just been good all around. And I mentioned it earlier, but we're seeing this offense is just him attacking space, right? Whether it's him attacking cuts, him out running the defense in transition, him coming off a pin down and either getting all the way to the rim or, pulling up. But I would say most of his shots, if I were to go back and watch a lot of them, he's getting to a lot of his shots with fewer than 3 dribbles, right? And even some of the ones he has in like transition, like he gets down to court so quickly that he's not having to do a whole lot. But it's been more so like line drives than like asking him to create and maybe do more of what he did as a rookie. Which we've talked to JB throughout the offseason, obviously throughout preseason about just using Ivy. And he always talks about that speed. And, again, like we've seen them really try to capitalize on that. Like, let's just make Ivy's life as easy as possible. Catch and shoot 3 from the corner. He's been knocking those down. Backdoor cut or cut from the wing. He's been attacking those gaps. Like, he's played his role, I think, extremely well. But again, a lot of it is just, not asking him to just spin on pick and rolls, right? Like, he is having stuff run for him within the offense to get him wide open. And, I think he's really capitalized on that. We talk so much about his Ivy, a point guard, this and that, but through 4 games, he's just been a really solid guard, like not even labeling him. He scored the ball really well. The secondary playmaking has been here at times, but overall, I think he's really, really thriving in this offense that's asking him to make quick decisions and essentially put pressure on the defense when he doesn't have the ball. I think the Pistons have opened up a lot of offense just from him having that threat and then obviously capitalizing on it once he does get the ball. Might be muted, Bryce.
Podcasting mistake. We got time for maybe 3 or 4 more players, Ku, knowing how we like to get into things. So who do you want to go to first? Who's the player on the Pistons that you want to definitely talk about here?
I'm pretty surprised with the uses of Simone Fontecchio.
Okay, yeah, let's do it. So we had a comment here real quick from Derek Brown. I want to see the Pistons get Simone Fontecchio more involved on offense. So is this what you're alluding to, or do you have a different thought?
It's not so much about getting him it's not so much like getting him the ball in the half court or trying to get him more shots or he needs to be a featured, shot taker in the offense. That's not so much it. I thought he would play a little bit more. And again, it's preseason and if you've watched the games, the first half is when you really get to see the real rotation. They play about 6 minutes in the third, and then like the end of bench guys come in. So you haven't really gotten to see like the full length of the game rotation. But I thought that you mentioned it earlier, Bryce. I really thought Simone Fontecchio would be a very likely candidate to start because of how well he played with Cade Cunningham and his ability to space the floor for Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivy. And it looks like that so far they're really judging between THJ and Malik Beasley. And I understand the whole thing with Malik Beasley because he is somewhat of another, guy that maybe could handle the ball a little bit on the weak side. You don't have to worry about him, I guess, turning it over or, you can trust him a little bit more.
He shoots it before he turns it over.
Yeah, right. But I guess you can trust him a little bit more with the ball in his hands. But I feel like Simone Fontecchio gives you more size in the starting lineup, gives you more versatility in the offensive or in the starting lineup, not just offensively, but also defensively. I wonder if it has more to do with how he wants to stagger guys and it just makes more sense and it's easier to bring Fontecchio off the bench and have him be one of the first guys brought in. I get that as well. I just thought that Simone Fontecchio, after how he played this past year and what they need in the starting lineup, that he would be a pretty likely candidate to start. But it looks like they're going to go a little bit smaller. I mean, maybe they could surprise us and go completely away from it and start him the regular season. And, they haven't done it all preseason and then just do it when the regular season starts. They could do that. But it seems like going THJ or Malik Beasley just naturally makes you smaller on the defensive side. And I don't know if I love that. But, yeah, I thought we'd see a little bit more from Simone during the preseason.
Yeah, no, I'm with you as well. I kind of penciled him as a starter. I wonder, is it possibly matchup dependent, right? The last 3 games, they've played the Suns, which is kind of a smaller team, than the Warriors, who's a little bit of a smaller team. Just looking at minutes per game, you can kind of see the 6 guys, Tobias, J.I., Cade. It's Holland right now, but we talked earlier about maybe that being a SAR when he's healthy. Malik Beasley and Duran are all over 20 minutes. And then the next three guys are Fontecchio, Hardaway Jr., and Stewart, all over 15. And then you get to like Sasser, Wendell Moore, and those guys that look like they're a little bit outside of the rotation. I guess I just would have thought that Fontecchio would have been in that first group of guys, not kind of the second group. So it will be interesting. Omari, any quick thoughts on Fontecchio? I think maybe one other thing, he is coming off the offseason surgery as well. I don't know if that plays into this at all, but any quick thoughts on him before we let Ku talk about the next player he wants to get to?
Yeah, I would also say that JB did mention, and a lot of coaches feel this way, that 5 preseason games really isn't enough to fully work out your rotation and, where certain guys thrive. So I do think they could end up starting Fontecchio in the end just because they need that additional size. He adds that 6'8", and then you have him, Tobias and Duran, which is a front court with some pretty decent size, but that's the one spot that seems unsettled, right? We've seen Malik Beasley start, we've seen Tim Hardaway Jr. start, and we've seen Simone Fontecchio start. And I believe Beasley, like I'd have to go back and check, but I'm pretty sure, Tim Hardaway started 2 of those. I think Beasley's probably started 2 before Tobias came back, and then Simone had 1. But like we've talked about Simone a lot on this pod. Obviously, we all like his game a lot, and we think he's a really good fit for the starting lineup, obviously with the shooting, but also the effort he plays with on defense. But I don't think the starting lineup is going to be resolved opening night. I think it's something realistically JB will continue to tweak as the season goes on, and eventually, if it does look like Ivy, Beasley, and Cade is too small of a starting lineup, then we absolutely could Simone Fontecchio get back in there. So I don't know how it's going to look opening night, but by December, I would imagine that JB will continue to tweak and roll out some different lineups just to experiment and figure out the best combinations with this group.
All right, Ku, who's the next player you'd like to talk about a little bit, maybe positive or negative, surprise, whatever, from this preseason?
So is it possible to talk about a player who hasn't played?
Let's do it.
So what do you guys think about Asar when he comes back? Like, based off the rotation, where do you see Asar sliding in? Because I think that's really interesting.
So I think, I don't want to put words in Omari's mouth. I know for me, like, I have looked at this season as you have to find out what JI and JD are, because they're the ones whose contract situations in some capacity are coming up. And so I've said, like, hey, let's give them the best chance to be successful. And if that means maybe Asar has to come off the bench or something like that, I'm okay with that. My biggest thing is I don't want this team to do all of the work they did to get floor spacing, and then you put Asar and JD on the floor together and kind of mess that up. So I don't really care how it works. I just kind of don't want, I think we're going to see what we see right now with Ron Holland. I think Ron Holland has subbed in with Isaiah Stewart every single game right now. And so I see Asar and Stu being paired together and playing a lot. And I actually love that pairing for Asar. And then maybe he can take some of the playmaking stuff we've talked about or whatever. So that's only been my only thing with Asar. I don't necessarily want to see him on the floor with Duran.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see rotation-wise what happens with that, just given that I think this is valuable time you need with Asar to figure out those matchups. But, I think you kind of mentioned it earlier, but, Asar coming in to probably take those Ron Holland minutes does seem like a likely outcome, just given that we've seen Ron Holland handle some secondary playmaking. He's been good at it, and we know that Asar could fill that role. But also just with the emphasis they put on defense, I don't know if they can not play Asar, right? Like, I don't know if you could set the tone you want on defense and leave your best defender on the bench. So a lot of that's TBD. I could easily see JB's lineup vary night from night, depending on matchups. There may be nights where you need Asar, there may be nights where you lean toward the spacing, and that ends up being the better decision. But when he does come back, like, I would assume he's probably more in like that 8-9 man row in the rotation, at least at first, because they've got to work him back and make sure he's good, make sure his winning is good and all that after missing so much time. But I could definitely see a defensive specialist role for him, just being like 8th, 9th man. And if he could add playmaking or some more scoring on top of that, then you probably look at an even bigger role from there. But just with what he gives on defense, I think you have to at least, guarantee him a spot just to set that tone on the perimeter.
Yeah, this is one of the concerns I had during during the regular season, or not regular season. I'm fumbling all over the place. Off season. When you have so many young guys on your team that you're trying to develop, it's hard to develop all of them at once.
Yep.
and get them all the reps that you want them to have at once. So I'm just interested to see how cause I think Asar should be one of the more important players as well. But like you mentioned, Bryce, this is, this, especially when you look at the contracts, this is the year that you need to find out about JI. You need to find out about JD. And they probably do take a little bit more of an importance when figuring out, because of that contract, where they're at contract wise, and where you're at in the rebuild. I'm really hoping, and I think that if Asar was healthy, I said this earlier, if Asar had been healthy and ready to play all throughout training camp and all throughout preseason, I think you'd see him with a little bit more of I think you would have seen him with a pretty big role. But like you mentioned, him coming back from this, he hasn't been able to play. He hasn't been able to do 5-on-5. So it's going to take a while to ramp them all up. One of the main concerns I've had as someone who is very high on Asar Thompson and someone who really believes in his ceiling, I just hope when he does come back and they're plugged into the rotation, that they get a little bit more creative rather than just have him take over Ron Holland's spot in the rotation, just have him do what Ron's been doing. Because I do think he's a little bit more talented than Ron. And I feel like him and his brother are very similar, him and Amen. I really hope that they don't just try to throw him into the position Amen was last year, where it's like, okay, well, we don't know how else to really use you. We're going to put you in the dunker spot and just have you sit there, because I feel like you're kind of limiting what he actually can bring. And with JP mentioning that they need guys to take up some of that playmaking when Cade's off the floor, I feel like Asar is one of those players that should be given the chance to take up some of that playmaking, especially with his vision and his ability to process the floor. I know he hasn't even gotten to play yet, and we don't know when he's coming back, but that's where I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, okay, you got these 9 guys playing. You probably want to keep THJ in the lineup, even if he's shooting, 1 of 15 or something from 3. He has a long history of shooting, and you want, like you mentioned, Bryce, you don't want to just get spacing and then not use it like last year. So he probably is stuck in the rotation no matter what, really, at least as the season goes on. If you got him, I think it's interesting, like you mentioned, Bryce, that maybe he could come in all the time with Isaiah Stewart, and then maybe that he, as the secondary ball handler in a bench lineup with Ivy. And because I think you've seen Ivy maybe struggle a little bit when he's the sole primary guy. So I think that maybe could be a really good role for him as well.
I like that. I mean, again, this isn't like an indictment of where like, oh, Asar's going to be a backup play, a second unit player his whole career. But hey, start this starting lineup, see what JI and JD have. This gives them the greatest, opportunity to be successful. And then in your second unit, you have like JI with, what would that be? Tim Hardaway Jr., Fontecchio, Asar, and Stu. Sign me up for that. I'm all about that. And then Asar probably still finishes a lot of games because you need his defense, right? I think the biggest argument for Asar starting is putting him on the other team's best player and not letting that guy go off to start games. How many Pistons games have we seen over in the first 6 minutes because you couldn't stop or even slow down Luka Doncic or Kevin Durant or Jason Tatum or whoever? If it's got to be Asar to slow that guy down, just slow him down at least. I can understand that argument as well. I was fairly high on Ron Holland in general, but I'm not opposed to him slow, coming into this way slower than what we've seen a lot of these other guys. I don't think that would be bad for him. And so, Asar taking those minutes, I think is fine. Any last thoughts, Koo? Any other players we've seen? We talked a little bit about the vets. We haven't seen Sasser. Obviously, we haven't got to see Bobby Klintman yet. Any quick thoughts on anybody or multiple quick hitters on players?
I'd say my last thoughts are that I'm the offense. I think if you've watched throughout preseason, one of the main differences that you've seen from this year's team to last year's team, I think part of it has to do with coaching and part of it has to do with roster construction. Obviously, they have more shooters. But just the spacing principles that they've had through 4 preseason games is much better than you've seen it all last year. You've seen spacer at corner, wing. You see them running empty corner pick and rolls, and then on the weak side you have, or the strong side, I guess I should say, you have shooters at every spot. So they're not pinching hard at the nail. They're not pinching off of a Killian Hayes. They're not pinching off of whoever that was at the wing last year. You have a Malik Beasley there. You have a THJ there. So they're not able to just pinch hard and swipe down at whoever the ball handler is, whether it's Ivy or a Kay Cunningham. Yeah, I think you're seeing JB use the spacing that they have in a very fun way that maybe I would say is more common just throughout the NBA. I think a lot of teams are doing it, but based off the Pistons the last few years, you haven't really seen it. So it's unique for the Pistons fan base and unique for the Pistons community. I think that's my overall takeaway from preseason is that they have the spacing, and JB has figured out, at least at this point right now, I'd say, a way to utilize that spacing in lineups to help your two main ball handlers. Whereas last year, I felt like the spacing that they, oh, I apologize about that. That was my alarm to get up. But I think last year you just didn't see them really utilize spacing in their lineups because they either one couldn't because it didn't make sense with some lineups, or Monty just didn't want to. So I think you're seeing it happen with JB. I think that will be a big time thing. Like right now, they're middle of the pack offensive rating in preseason. I'd expect that to be where they be during the regular season. I think they can be a middle of the pack offense and be a below average defense. And I think that's where my expectation is. And while it is preseason, like you mentioned at the beginning, Bryce, they've kind of hit that for me.
I love it. All right, cool. This was a blast. I know we could go much longer. I'm sure if we wanted to get into all of these other players for 5 or 10 minutes, we could turn this into a 2-hour pod, but we all got to get to work. So we got to get you out of here. I got to get out of here, everybody else as well. So thank you for everybody who tuned in. Again, like, subscribe, all of that. Cool. Before we let you go, let them know where they can find Locked On, the YouTube channel that you mentioned earlier. I know you're doing stuff over there. Plug all of that stuff before we get out of here.
Yeah, you guys can follow me over on Twitter at Khahil. You can also find Locked On Pistons podcast, whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. Go over to the YouTube channel, hit that subscribe, and we're on our way to 10,000 subscribers. And also, I've started up my own personal YouTube. It's Khahil, same as my Twitter at. I'm going to be breaking down plays after each regular season game. I'll be breaking down like 4 or 5 favorite plays I saw from that specific game. We might do some other stuff, but that's the main thing I'm doing over there. So I appreciate you guys having me, man. It's always a lot of fun.
Love it. Real quick, Omari, I'm going to plug the Motor City Hoops Substack with games going again. I'm doing my breakdown, my game notes at the end. So if you guys haven't subscribed to that, subscribe to that. It's completely free. I put it out as soon as I watch the game. Just 2.5 pages of notes of what I saw during the game. Omari, let everybody know where they can read your fantastic work and take us away.
You can read my work at DetroitFreePress.com. That is FREEP.com. If you are one of the pod listeners who gets our pod from Spotify and Apple Podcasts solely instead of Freep.com. I actually got an email from somebody a couple of weeks ago who was like, "What's going on? Do you guys haven't posted an episode in like a month?" And I was like, "Yes, we have." Then I realized it wasn't on Freep.com for some reason.
Oh,
there are people who
okay. So the same person.
Freep.
Yeah, I was getting someone in my Twitter DMs like, "How come you guys haven't?" I was like, "We literally dropped a pod yesterday. What are you talking about?" So
we've taken 1 week off in 2.5 years. Like we don't take days off. We're always present, like the mail, like every single week. So anyway, thank you for listening this morning, and big thanks to our editor-in-chief, Nicole Avery Nichols. Big thanks to Wes Davenport, as always. And we will talk to you all next week.